Hello there. This is another video on the element system of Anelog and his colleagues, and I'm going to deal with some other things today. And in particular, I'm going to have a look at the archetypes which Bran Collingwood refers to as the Quadrant Archetypes. So here we go. Okay, now here's the wheel, and if we remember, we have the four cardinal archetypes, which forms a sort of like the cross. Yeah, this is the cardinal cross, and these are single gender archetypes in that they are elements all of one gender. So this is air and fire, this is fire and air, this is earth and water, this is water and earth. Yeah, and if we remember, these all have a very supportive relationship to each other. In other words, the magician really supports the jester and vice versa, and Mother Nature really supports the enchantress and vice versa. So that's something to be aware of. And of course, this is the cardinal of air, this is the cardinal of fire, this is the cardinal of earth, and this is the cardinal of water. Now, if we look at the remaining 8 archetypes, these form what Bran calls the quadrant archetypes, and each of these is a quadrant. So, for instance, here we have air and water and air. So you see, they share the same elements but in different proportions. This is water and fire, fire and water again. Same elements, different orders. This is fire and earth, earth and fire. Same elements, different order. And this is earth and air, air and earth. Same elements, different order. Now, so we want to have a look at these because we already know that these archetypes are very, very active in reconciling and helping each other. Yeah. So we know, for instance, that the nymph or child is very much supported by the matriarch and vice versa. Yeah. The warrior is very much supported by the sage and vice versa. Hearth priestess or queen is very much supported by the actress and vice versa. And the fool is very much supported by the patriarch and vice versa. So we know that these all really help each other. They form a very, very interconnected system in that way. But what we want to have a look at is the relationships of the quadrants and how they kind of relate to themselves as well, because that's an interesting subject in itself. So let's have a look at, say, the patriarch and the nymph or child here. Yeah. Now, what are we going to say about that? Well, these appear to be quite close together. Well, obviously they're quite close together. They're adjacent, but what's good to realize is that they're actually very good for each other. Yeah, they're actually very good for each other. And in the same way that, say, the magician and the jester are good for each other, and Mother Nature and the enchantress are good for each other, and these all share the same elements, right? Same elements, different order, same elements, different order. So when you get to the quadrants, rather than being ranged across the circle, this relationship is adjacent to each other. These are good for each other, same elements, different order. And you can see that because the patriarch gives clarity to the child. It gives principle and clarity to the child, which really helps it. And the child, or nymph, gives the patriarch imagination. It gives him this sort of innocence and openness of vision, which he really needs. So this is very, very good. They're very good for each other, yeah? And it's the same with all of the others you see. Down here, actress, fool, Full gives the actress more fire, more life, more light, more freedom, yeah? Gets her out of herself, yeah? Helps her to become just better tempered, really, and happier in all sorts of ways. More creative, more genuinely creative. It gives us a spark, yeah? And the actress gives the Fool more emotion, more feeling, yeah? More means of beauty, yeah? So this is very much concerned with a lot. There's a lot here about artistic genius as well, yeah, see in this combination. Very good for each other, yeah? Now, you'll notice none of these quadrant combinations, none of them form a complete picture in terms of the elements, but they're just very good for each other. They're very supportive for each other in the same way as the cardinals are good for each other. Over here, the warrior gives the queen assertiveness, an inner fire, supports her inner fire. And the hearth priestess or the queen, it helps to ground the warrior, makes him really grounded, brings his fire into the body. Yeah. Very good for both of them. And over here, now, the sage brings serenity to the matriarch, and the matriarch brings a kind of a basic life effectiveness in terms of survival to the sage. Yeah. Apart from anything else. It's just a very quick look at it. But now let's return to the patriarch and the nymphal child. Now, what happens when things aren't working well? Yeah? And when things aren't working well, for instance, the patriarch will be in conflict with the hearth priestess. Yeah? And the nymph will be in conflict with the warrior. This sort of thing. And what's happening here is that the patriarch is not going the right way on his journey, because if we also remember, we have journeys shown by these squares. Yeah. Now, the patriarch is an outer journey archetype. It's a closed archetype and an outer journey archetype. So this is his journey, and it always goes clockwise. That's the way it's meant to go, clockwise. Yeah. So patriarch to actress to warrior to matriarch, back to patriarch. The child, on the other hand, follows the inner journey. It's an inner journey archetype. It's an open state. So the child or nymph follows this inner journey, and it goes anti-clockwise. That's the way it's meant to go. That's the way it really works. So the nymphal child goes to the sage, which goes to the hearth priestess or queen, which goes to the fool, and then back up to the child. Now, what happens when they go in the wrong directions? When things aren't working and they're going backwards, and we say they're going into their shadow because they're getting their negative manifestations. So the patriarch is going the wrong way. He's going anti-clockwise over to the matriarch. So we see, if we look at this spatially, it kind of looks like he's going this way. Yeah? He's going over towards the magician, sage, to the matriarch. Yeah, you could even look at it that way. And the child is going clockwise, which she shouldn't be doing. She's going down to the fool. So she's going over towards the enchantress. And you see, this means that they're being pulled away from each other. Whereas if they were going in the right direction, you see, if he was following the clockwise path, he'd be going in this direction somehow. So he's going towards the child. And the child, if it was going anti-clockwise in its inner direction, it's going this way towards the patriarch. So when they're going in their right directions, even spatially, it looks like the two quadrant archetypes are converging on each other. So they're coming together and they're resonating and getting what they, and helping each other. So you can see, even here it works. And so what you get when things are going wrong, it's as if the patriarch is going towards the magician and towards too much air. Now, the child or nymph is going towards the enchantress and too much water, and it's as if you get a rift between them. And if you look at all of the quadrant archetypes, you could see the same patterns in all of them, with rifts between them and the actual archetypes heading back towards their ruling cardinal, if you see what I mean. Getting too much in their first element, and they're developing rifts with their other quadrant partner. So, of course, what they need the help, for instance. They need some help. So, for instance, now look, if you've got, say, the Patriarch's going too much towards the Magician, heading off in that direction, heading off in a counterclockwise direction when he needs to go clockwise, what helps him? Well, the Fool does. And look what the Fool does. The Fool pulls him back this way, yeah? Pulls him back in a clockwise direction, and that pulls him back towards the Nymph or Child. Nymph or Child is helped by the Matriarch. The Matriarch's pulling her back in a counterclockwise direction, away from the Enchantress and back towards the Patriarch. So again, we see that the supporting relationships, spatially, they seem to work as well in terms of this sort of system. The spatial relationships actually work as kind of attractors that pull the archetypes in the correct direction for their proper relationships, for their proper journey. So the Patriarch ends up back on the outer journey, and the child ends up back on the inner journey. On the other hand, if we look at the archetypes that, say, the Patriarch and the Nymph have the most problem with, well, the Patriarch's going to be most in conflict. If it's negative, it's going to be most in conflict with the Queen or Half Priestess. And the Nymph is going to be most in conflict with the Warrior. Now, if we take that as a negative attractor, say, it's because it's getting focused on that problem, what's it going to do? It's going to drag the Patriarch again. It's going to drag the Patriarch back into too much air and round this way. Round in the counterclockwise direction, away from his journey. And same with the Nymph, who's got problems with the Warrior. And so there's this focus on the Warrior negatively. What's that going to do? It's going to drag her back towards the Enchantress. It's going to drag her in the clockwise direction, away from the direction of her journey. So you can see it works both ways, whereas then the supporting ones correct that and take them in the correct direction. Now, one more thing here, which is just really funny and interesting, because we can see that what the direction of positive and negative movement is for these things. So, for instance, for the closed archetypes in all of the quadrants, the direction of positive direction is clockwise around the circle, yeah? And the positive direction for the open archetypes is anti-clockwise around the circle. So we can see that. Now, the negative direction for the closed archetypes is anti-clockwise around the circle, and the negative direction for the open archetypes is clockwise round the circle. Yeah. Now, what about the Cardinals? This is really funny. Now, for the Cardinals, the positive direction is towards the center, because that's where their same elements, different order archetype is that really supports them, in the same way that the quadrants support each other and help each other. So, and if we want to look at what supports the cardinal archetypes in a more complete elemental sense, it's the triads, which we dealt with in another video. So you see, For the cardinal archetypes, their positive direction is towards the center. Their negative direction is out from the center. So you can see that there's a different spatial arrangement there. And it's quite bizarre, really, because whereas the quadrant archetypes, they go into shadow through a circular direction around the circle, but in the wrong direction. For the quadrant archetypes, for the cardinal archetypes, they go into a shadow by going out from the center, and in a sense they're heading for beyond the edge of the circle, which is a very weird idea because there's nothing there. And that just shows, in a sense, that the shadow archetypes are illusory in that sense, but they're illusions that we get very caught up in and can get sort of like obsessed with or by. So it's certainly very interesting. But again, if you bring in, but look, again, to have a look at the way the supporters work for the cardinals, say the magician. What supports the magician? Well, what supports the magician, if he's too far out in shadow air, what supports him is the hearth priestess or queen and the actress. That forms his triad, And what does that do? It draws him back towards the center. It draws him back down so that he'll be in relationship with the jester. Same way with the jester. What helps the jester if he's too far out in shadow fire? What helps the jester? Well, the nymph or child and the matriarch. That forms his triad. And so that's what will draw him back towards the center and back towards relationship with the magician. And it's the same. Mother Nature, Patriarch, Fool. This is another triad. Draws over towards the enchantress, draws towards the center. Enchantress, who's too far in shadow water. What would happen with that? Well, again, the supporting archetypes for the enchantress are the sage and the warrior, which forms her triad. Now, what does that do? It draws her back towards the center, back towards them, back towards the center, and back into relationship with Mother Nature. So we see the whole system works together very nicely. And if we follow the supporting archetypes and the same element combinations being in good relationship to each other, then we find it stays in balance, it stays in completion, and it withdraws from the illusory shadow worlds. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Thank you.